consensus on these issues which binds us together.
My Lords, in rising in that spirit of consensus, I begin by declaring my former position as editor of The Guardian Weekly, and noble Lords will find an unusual degree of confluence between what you might describe as the two ends of the media spectrum, in that I would very much agree with the noble Lord, Lord Black, about the issues of artificial intelligence use and indeed digital giant use of material coming from mainstream and indeed private publishers without declaring or making fair payment for that. And I think it's something that I'm not quite sure there seem to be so many bills that this is coming up with at the moment, but looking at the issue of so much of what's described as generative artificial intelligence is actually plagiarism on a giant scale. And I will declare a meeting last week with UK Music, who are very much pushing for the idea that the source material of anything that's generated through these kind of technologies needs to be declared, as well as the fact of the way in which it's been generated. These are issues that need to be raised. A number of other noble Lords declaring their creative endeavours made me think that I should actually declare that I have a forthcoming book in April, Change Everything, How We Can Rethink, Repair and Rebuild Society, published with Unbound. And I have an interest, thank you, and I have an interest in seeing that that is not open to being rehashed, reused, recycled without my consent. Yet, as far as I'm aware, we have no capacity to do that, and that's something I think we need to think about in this bill and more broadly. Now, I have to say it is a pleasure to take part in a debate in which we are seeing an unusual degree of consensus. Noble Lords have had plenty of time to prepare for the passage of this bill to your Lordship's House. It's widely acknowledged to be necessary and broadly headed in the right direction. So I think the department probably needs to be warned that that will probably produce a strong desire to improve it at committee and report stage. I'm reminded of the most recent similar bill I can think of, which was the Now Domestic Abuse Act, which left this House a lot stronger than it arrived after a great deal of cross-party, consensual, constructive contributions. I thought the front bench contributions, like many said, were very informative. I will perhaps pick up one point from the noble Lord the Minister. I don't share the enthusiasm for unicorns. Unicorns have very often actually turned out to really be phoenixes that crash and burn and are not capable of rebirth at great cost, human and financial suffering. And of course, as many noble Lords have said, we have an ecology which has seen many creative, exciting, new independent businesses swallowed up. The minnows are swallowed up by the sharks, and we really need to think how we can create a different kind of ecosystem. And I think it is really worth focusing on the fact that the digital world was born into a system, an oligarchic system, where we have a big 4, 5 or 6 dominating all sectors of our economy. So it's perhaps not surprising that what we've arrived at is a system with very little diversity in it, a few large players. Now, my aim is not to repeat what's been already said, so I'm going to tick off some points that have already been well covered. The issue of subscriptions for charities, the noble Lord, Lord Etherton, among many others. I will just note, putting my favourite charity, or one of my favourite charities, English Heritage, is among those who are very concerned about this issue. It clearly is something that your Lordship's House will need to address. I also think that, picking up from the points of the noble Lord, Lord Black, small independent news providers, many noble Lords will have received a briefing from the Public Interest News Foundation, and some have referred to it. These are issues that we desperately need: local news, supporting local democracy, supporting local community. These are areas where we desperately need action. Now, I will associate myself also with the speech of the noble lady Baroness Hayman, not currently in her place. Right to repair is something I've long been working on, and I look forward to seeing what we can do in that area, so I won't repeat any of that. Now, I think that you can hear the passion of personal experiences in many noble Lords focusing on the difficulty of ending subscriptions. My suggestion to the noble Lord, Lord Vasey, If you don't know the CEO, what you need is a strong social media following, and a grumble on social media is often very effective. And I'd like to think that if we do that enough, it might have some impact on encouraging companies to do a better job of allowing people to escape from subscriptions that they no longer wish to have. So I'm going to focus on main part of my speech on an area that no Noble Lords, I believe, has yet covered, and that's looking particularly at the issue of advertising. And we are, all of us, both online, through screens in train stations, on roads, in many other places, exposed to thousands of digital advertisements on a more or less daily basis. So it's really crucial that to protect consumers from misinformation and harm, advertising needs to be properly and thoroughly regulated. However, we currently have a system that's slow, opaque, and is definitively failing. The UK Standards Authority is not an independent regulator. It's self-funded by the advertising industry. Any complaints the ASA handles is essentially, therefore, marking its own homework. So we really need to look at this regulatory gap as a matter of urgency. We should have a regulator that's independent, transparent, and one that can take timely action. And I'll particularly focus on the issues of the role of the companies advertising the products being advertised in terms of producing waste, pollution, and environmental harms, and ignoring human rights. Now, there was recent research published by the Financial Times that shows that Shell, one of the world's top polluters, is estimated to have spent £220 million in advertising in 2023. Much of that is very explicitly aimed at younger people. And I do have to share a case study of one of my favourite examples of this, because the sheer uselessness and inaccuracy of it has to be noted. A couple of years back, going through the Eurostar terminal, peering round a corner into an entirely unused area of the terminal, there was an advert from Exxon about their plans for green energy and algae, something that Exxon has subsequently got out of entirely. And at the time, the company was defending itself about this, and a company spokesperson said the company had spent more than $350 million trying to develop biofuels from algae. That was more than double what it spent on advertising. Greenwashing, anybody? And I think it is worth noting that if Noble Lords go back to when the government was first announcing this bill, we were promised protection from greenwashing. This was going to be a central part of this bill, but we didn't hear in the Noble Lord the Minister's introduction a similar focus on the protection from greenwashing that we're looking towards. Now, I would suggest, and I will also be looking to bring amendments, that we can go further than protection for actively misleading issues. We need, in this climate emergency, as we speak in the middle of the COP28 talks, to acknowledge that advertising is a push factor for the generation of massive amount of unnecessary carbon emissions. The Green Party is calling for a ban on high carbon advertising. Fossil fuels, flights and SUVs are major ones. That might also include fast fashion, meat and dairy, and the banks that are funding the likes of BP and Shell. Now, I can feel your Lordship's House wincing at this point, but I would point out that there is no right to advertise. We have a choice to decide what our society looks like, what people are bombarded with. We don't have to say it's open slather and you can do whatever you like. The obvious area for this is, of course, cigarette advertising, which we've long had very tight controls on. But I'd also note now that Transport for London restricts advertising on a range of products, including junk food, and it's now close to banning gambling promotion. France and Amsterdam are also looking at working on banning high-carbon adverts. We can choose what the future looks like. So, my lords, there's so much to do, and I think it's worth, I'm going to finish on the point to make, that how much so many bills your Lordship's House is dealing with are interrelated. And I don't think anyone's yet referred to the fact that we are speaking, of course, in the fraud capital of the world. I'm quoting UK Finance here, and we really need to cross-reference what's happening in terms of financial advertising that is a huge problem that consumers need so much protection from.